Anakin, like his son Luke, is just a boy on a desert planet in the Outer Rim, lamenting his existence and his remove from all of these adventures that he imagines are unfolding across the galaxy that he wants to be able to have access to. But Anakin is different from Luke in a number of ways.
For one, he is enslaved, whereas Luke had freedom of movement, was brought up not by his parents, but certainly in an environment where he could experience love and some freedom. Meeting Anakin, one of the first things we realize is loves his mom, and he absolutely craves a human connection. One of the best parts of this character is that is the thing that is his downfall.
That's the tragedy.
He wants to be loved, loves his mother, eventually grows to love Padme, and that is the lever which Palpy will use to turn him to the dark side. Now, in many ways, Anakin's kind of rejection of the life he's leading will be mirrored in his eventual rejection of the rules and the strictures of the Jedi Order. He wants freedom. He wants to make his own choices, wants to make his own life, wants to just kind of like be happy with Padme and build a safe world for them. And it's these perceived threats all around him that drive him to the dark side.
I think about that exact idea when he proclaims so proudly that he wants to be a pilot, because that is an idea that we hear from a lot of different characters, including, obviously, Luke, his child, also Han. Why? Why a pilot? Because what does flight represent? It represents agency, the ability to literally go anywhere and do anything and to exert some control over your own life. And Anakin in this moment and so many of the characters in this story don't feel like they have access to that very basic right of personhood, which is I get to decide what I'm going to do today, tomorrow, and the next day. I'm going to decide how I want to live my life. Like that compulsion to explore is stemming fully from the desire to not be tethered to the life that someone else told you had to have. But that's the irony, because the Jedi are that path to freedom for him, but ultimately end up representing just another kind of trap. And as we have said and will continue to say, in many ways, his origin and his driving force are love, are this capacity for love and this desire for attachment to the people in his life he cherishes, his mother, Padme, and eventually his children, Luke and Leia, who represent not only a paternal bond, but literally the fruits of his love with Padme. That's what makes him so compelling. That's so interesting. And so when he says here,
Mom, you say the biggest problem in this universe is nobody helps each other.
Darth Vader is sitting there saying, the problem in the universe is that people don't help each other. That's kind of cool. That's kind of an incredible thing that we get to witness. And even in his darkest moments, when he is turning, when the seduction is underway, he is still driven, at least in part, there's a kernel of it still, by this desire to aid and protect the people that he cares about. And Shmi recognizes this. Shmi, his mother, unnamed in the first film. We don't learn her name until the second movie. Hilarious. She says he was meant to help you. That's what she says to Qui-Gon. She sees it too, just like Qui-Gon is going to start to see the role that Anakin has to play. Meant to because the Force, because the prophecy of him being the chosen one deemed it so. Maybe, sure, yeah, but also because it is actually fundamentally in his nature to want to help. Fascinating.
Qui-Gon quite quickly senses that there is something about Anakin, some role that he has to play, and he can tell that he's powerful, and he thinks it's strange that someone so powerful should just come across their path like this. If Anakin had grown up in the Republic, of course, he would have been plucked out of obscurity much earlier. The blood test would have been done, and he would have been trained.
Yes.
But instead, he fell off the map, ended up in Tatooine in this backwater. His Hogwarts letter never arrived. But here he is, plucked from obscurity by chance by Qui-Gon Jinn, and Qui-Gon sees the hand of destiny at work here.
But in this moment, right away, you're processing this, and you are forced to grapple with the fact that Anakin is being presented to us as a god. Not just the chosen one of prophecy, Jedi lore, but a literal Christ-like figure born from something other than just the union between a man and a woman. His literal origin is not just a mystery, but a mystery that asks viewers to recall biblical teaching. And that's a moment where you go back to the original trilogy and say, well, however I feel about the midichlorians aside, Jedi are presented to us as a religion. Think of the very heart of what the Force actually is and how people talk about it as this ever-present source of aid and assistance and hope that's there to help you lead the way.
Is your path determined by some master hand, or do you get to decide what your fate will be? And is it somewhere in between? Does fate place you on a path and then it's your decisions that allow you to carry some mission to its completion? Does the Force control or does it guide? This path is in place before you, Shmi tells Anakin. The choice is yours alone. The Force, the universe, the prophecy might have brought Anakin and Qui-Gon together, but Anakin is going to be the one who decides whether to proceed, just as he's the one who's going to decide whether to turn on his master, side with Palpatine, kill the younglings, etc., on and on. There is, of course, a sense of inevitability about Anakin, not only because of the prophecy, but by its very nature, a prequel
You know where it's
takes the suspense out of it to a certain extent, because you just understand this character is going to end up at a certain place. And yet, despite all of that, there are many choices in front of Anakin.
Shmi, once again, provides some much-needed wisdom. She tells Anakin, can't stop the change any more than you can stop the suns from setting. And again, here we see this budding conflict. Even though what George Lucas said is true and this is a positive, excited kid, we see that conflict already building in Anakin's heart over this desire for and the nature of control. When he parts with his mother, he promises her that he will return to free her. And that is going to be one of the defining promises in his life. Sure, yeah. Freeze her for like a second until she dies in his arms and then he commits genocide. But fine print, you know? Anakin then is presented to the Jedi Council. And when Anakin asks what being afraid to lose his mother has to do with anything, Yoda says,
everything. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. I sense much fear in you.
An iconic quote, a quintessential Star Wars idea. One of the central ideas that will be present throughout the entire story, and one that is fully associated with the light side, identifying the perils that lead to the dark side. But it's so much more complex than that. Why? We're going to talk about this throughout the entire podcast. Why is fear a bad thing? Fear is a human thing. Anger is too. And maybe the fear in and of itself is not what pushes Anakin or any other Force-sensitive being to the dark side. Like you were saying before, maybe it's the Jedi asking Anakin to ignore the things that make him a human being.
If you enjoyed this, why wouldn't you? Make sure you check out our full Binge Mode Star Wars podcast series, available wherever you listen to podcasts.